Once your father signs the Harbor Street 566 transition and credit authorization, the $240,000 line can clear our loan and still give us enough to start over. Lydia said to my son at their wedding dinner. Owen's hand trembled around his fork. What transfer?
He asked. The old brass key to Harbor Street storage was in my jacket pocket, warm from my fist. I had owned that building for 14 years and never told Owen. Lydia looked at me, not him. That was when I understood she had not merely found my secret. She had built a plan around it. The wedding band was playing by the windows. People near us were laughing about the cake, leaning a little to one side. No one else had heard Lydia clearly. She recovered first. "I thought you two had talked," she said. "I only meant it will be nice when Frank decides to help with the business." Owen looked at me as if I had slipped into a different chair while he was not watching. "Dad?" I could have asked Lydia how much she knew. I could have told Owen everything beside the wedding cake, while his friends watched his face change. Instead, I put my napkin down. "I should have told you about the building years ago," I said. "I will tell you the truth tomorrow. Not here." Then I looked at Lydia. "Until then, no one speaks for me, signs for me, or makes plans around a building they do not own." Her smile stayed in place, but her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "Of course, Frank," she said. "I left before the toasts. I told Owen I had a headache, which was not entirely a lie." In the parking lot, I sat in my truck for a long minute, with Ruth's brass key pressed into my palm. Ruth had worn that key on a blue ribbon when we bought Harbor Street storage. The building was 41 doors behind a chain-link gate, an office with a leaky window, and a strip of cracked pavement beside a tire shop. It had never made us rich. Most months, the rent paid the loan, the taxes, repairs, and a small piece of my retirement. But it held a teacher's classroom books, a restaurant owner's equipment after a flood, and boxes from a widow who could not yet bear to give away her husband's tools. After Ruth died, I had kept the building private. Owen was 20 then, finishing school and trying to grow up without his mother. I wanted him to choose his life without measuring it against what he might inherit. Later, privacy became habit. Habit became silence. Silence became the lie I had let sit between us. At home, an alert from the title monitoring service I had used since buying the place was waiting in my email. A lender had requested confirmation of a proposed $240,000 credit line against Harbor Street storage. The request was called the Harbor Street Transition and Credit Authorization. It listed my name, my building, and a signature that looked like mine until I noticed the last loop in the letter F. Ruth used to tease me about that loop. She said it looked like a fishhook because I had been signing repair invoices too fast for 30 years. The signature on the request did not have it. I called the lender's fraud line before I went to bed. I told the woman who answered that I had not authorized any credit line, transfer, or application. She said no money had been released. The request had been held because their title check showed a question about ownership, but the packet included a statement that my son would soon manage the building and that I had approved the change. "Can you send me the packet?" I asked. "Not until our review is complete," she said. "But you may send us anything that shows the statement is false." That was the first thing I needed to know. Lydia's words at the wedding had not been a dream about someday. She had tried to turn someday into a $240,000 piece of paperwork. Before I called Owen, I called the licensed investigator who had helped me years earlier after a break-in at Harbor Street. I gave her the lender's confirmation, the false signature, and Lydia's words from the wedding. "I need lawful proof, or I need to be told there is none," I said. "My son married her last night." She told me she could begin preserving business-related communications and lawfully document a meeting in my authorized office. She could not enter a private home, manufacture an admission, or turn suspicion into evidence. "Good," I said. "I do not want a performance. I want the truth before it destroys him." I called Owen the next morning. Come to Harbor Street before work, I told him. Come alone first. There is something in your name that you need to see. He did not like that. You want me to leave Lydia the morning after our wedding. I want you to come as my son before you come as anyone's husband. He arrived an hour later in the same dark pants he had worn the night before. His white shirt was wrinkled at the collar. He stood in the office doorway and looked through the window at the rows of green doors. You own this? He asked. Yes. For how long? 14 years. His face tightened. Mom knew? She chose it with me. And you never thought I should know? There was no answer that could make that question easy. I thought I was keeping you free to build your own life, I said. Then I let fear decide too many years for me. I was wrong not to tell you. He looked back toward the gate. Do you think I would have asked you for it? No, that was never what I feared. I feared you would start seeing yourself as a future owner instead of a man with a life already worth living. That fear was mine, not yours. He nodded once, but it was not forgiveness. I set a copy of the lender's confirmation email on the desk. I had blacked out the numbers because they did not matter as much as the names. Did you ask for a credit line using this building? I asked. Owen read the page twice. No. Did you sign anything Lydia gave you this week? He shook his head, then he stopped. She asked me to sign a form for an inventory business. She said it only meant I supported her idea. I told her I would look at it after the wedding. Did she give you the form? No. She said she would bring it home. The office seemed colder. The lender has a document saying you will manage Harbor Street soon, I said. It says I approved it. Neither statement is true. Owen sat down slowly in the chair Ruth used when she handled late payments. You think Lydia did this? I think someone used my name and your future to ask for money. I am not going to accuse your wife with less than proof. He looked at the door as if she might walk through it and turn the whole morning back into a misunderstanding. What are you going to do? I took Ruth's brass key from my pocket and set it between us. First, I am going to make sure no one gets access to this building or its tenants. Then I am going to find out who made the false promise. I took Owen outside and walked him down the rear row. A restaurant owner was moving dry boxes back into his unit after a kitchen flood. Near the gate, a widowed tenant was opening a cedar chest to take out one of her husband's old tool belts. Owen had never known these people existed. To Lydia, 12 units were 12 blank squares on a page. To me, they were promises already made. If a false loan goes through, I said, this building does not become an opportunity. It becomes collateral for somebody else's mistake. These people could lose the space they depend on before anyone explains what happened. Owen looked from the restaurant owner to the widow's unit. I did not know, he said. That is why I asked you here before I asked you to judge anyone. The investigator met me at a diner across from Harbor Street that afternoon. She explained what she could and could not do. She could lawfully document meetings and communications connected to my business office under the rules that applied there. She could not enter private spaces, manufacture a conversation, or make anyone say something they did not mean. I do not need you to make Lydia look guilty, I told her. I need to know whether she is guilty before I destroy my son's trust in her. The investigator nodded. Then give her a choice she thinks is useful, she said. People explain themselves when they believe a door is opening. I did not ask how she would do her work. I only signed the authorization for a lawful recorded business meeting in my own office and asked her to preserve anything she collected without changing it. That evening, I called Lydia. The lender wants a conversation about Harbor Street, I said. Bring whatever plan you had in mind to the office tomorrow morning. Owen will be there too. There was a pause, so short another person might have missed it. Of course, she said. I am glad you are finally ready to discuss it. I am ready to understand it, I said. She came the next day with a cream folder and the same pearl earrings she had worn at the wedding. Owen arrived separately. He had barely slept and I could see he was trying to keep his hurt from becoming a verdict. Lydia set the folder on my desk. "I know this looks sudden," she said, "but I have experience planning events. Owen has a good head for logistics. Harbor Street has unused space. I thought we could make it a family business." "How many units are unused?" I asked. She blinked. "I do not know the exact number. Then why does the plan say 12? Her eyes moved to Owen. He opened the folder. The first page described an inventory company. The next listed 12 rear units at Harbor Street. Future management by Owen Delaney, and family support pending transfer. Owen looked up. "You wrote this?" "It is a draft," Lydia said. "Nothing has happened." "Something happened," I said. "A lender received a request using my name." For a second, the room went still. Then Lydia gave a small, tired laugh. "Frank, you are treating an application like a crime. I was trying to see whether there was a path for us. Did you sign my name?" "No," she answered too quickly. Owen pushed the folder away. "Why did you not tell me you knew about the building?" Lydia looked at him then, and something softer entered her face. "Because I knew you would make it smaller than it is. You would say it was your father's property, not ours. You would say we should wait." "It is his property," Owen said. "You are his son. You are not a stranger to his future." I watched my son hear that sentence. It was not the same as hearing a confession. It was only a clue to how Lydia arranged the world in her mind. "No one is using 12 units, I said. No one is using my name. The lender has been told I did not authorize their request." Lydia's face lost color. "You called them?" "Yes." She stood. "Then there is nothing to discuss." She gathered the folder, but Owen placed his hand over it. "Leave it," he said. For a moment I thought might argue. Instead, she let go. "Fine," she said. "Keep your building." "I was trying to build a life with you, Owen." She left without looking at either of us. Owen did not speak until the office door had closed. "Maybe she was only trying to make it work," he said. "Maybe," I said. "That is why I am not calling this proof yet." He looked at me sharply. "There is more? There may be. The lender will not show me the whole packet until they complete their review. If Lydia wrote only a foolish draft, we will know. If she did more, I need you to be ready for the truth before it arrives." Owen stayed after I closed the office. We walked the front row in silence while a tenant loaded boxes into a van. At the end of the driveway, his phone lit up. Lydia had sent 3 messages. "Why is your father calling lenders? Do not let him make you think I am the enemy. Please come home. We need to fix this before he locks you out of your own future." Owen read them once, then handed me the phone. "She thinks this building is already mine," he said. "Or she needs you to think it is. Those are not the same thing." He put the phone back in his pocket. "Should I answer?" "Tell her you will speak to her after work. Do not accuse her. Do not tell her what the lender said. If she has been dishonest, I do not want a warning to make the evidence disappear." His face hardened. "That sounds like you already decided." "No," I said. "It sounds like I know what it costs to call someone guilty before you can prove it." He looked back at the gate. "And if she is guilty, then you will not have to take my word for it." Owen came to my house that evening with an overnight bag in his truck. He did not bring it inside. He stood by the porch rail, reading a new message from Lydia. It said she had spoken with someone who could fix the lender confusion if Owen would meet her alone the next morning. She wanted him to bring his driver's license and sign a simple identity page. She promised it had nothing to do with my building. Owen handed me the phone. His thumb was shaking. "Why would she need my license?" he asked. "I do not know," I said, "and I will not pretend I do." "But you do not hand anyone your identity because they tell you a problem will disappear. She is my wife. Yes, that is why this hurts." He looked at the dark windows of my house. "If I tell her no, she will say you are controlling me. Then tell her you need to see the papers first." "That is not control. That is a grown man reading before he signs." Owen typed a reply while I waited. "I will come to Harbor Street tomorrow. I will not bring anything or sign anything until I understand it." Lydia answered almost at once, "Fine. Your father does not have to know every detail." Owen looked up from the screen. "She still thinks she can do this there. Then we will give her the chance to tell the truth in the one place where the building, the lender, and your future cannot be separated." I called the investigator and told her about the message. She said the request for Owen's identification, combined with the held credit request, gave the next day's meeting a clear business purpose to preserve. She would keep the record lawful and intact. I told her again that I did not want Owen baited, pushed, or used as a tool. "He is the person I am trying to protect," I said. "Then let him make one honest choice," she replied. "Tell him to come without a signature and without a lie." That was all I asked of my son. That afternoon, the investigator called. Lydia had called Harbor Street twice from the parking lot. Once after leaving the office, and once after she thought the building had closed. She had asked whether I was gone. Then she made an appointment for the following morning, saying she needed to collect a paper Owen had left behind. I called Owen. "Your wife is coming back tomorrow," I said. "Do not confront her tonight. I am not asking you to pretend nothing is wrong. I am asking you to give the truth one day to stand on its own. You already hired someone, did you not?" I did not lie to him. I hired someone to make sure I do not accuse her without evidence. He was silent for a long time. "If she did this," he said, "I need to hear it myself. Then you will." The next morning, I told Lydia I had to meet a tenant at the back gate. I left the office lights on and the cream folder, with the Harbor Street transition and credit authorization on top where she had left it. The investigator was handling the authorized recording from outside the room. I did not ask for details. I did not want a trap built from tricks. I wanted Lydia to make the choice she would make if I were not there. She came in at 10. A man on speakerphone greeted her by first name. I did not know him, and I did not need to. What mattered was what Lydia said next. "Frank froze the Harbor Street transition and credit authorization," she told the man. "But Owen still thinks the packet was just about helping with inventory. He will sign the revised page if I tell him it only gives me room to rent tables." The man asked something I could not hear clearly. Lydia answered. "He does not know I copied Frank's signature onto the $240,000 credit authorization. He thinks he will manage the building. He does not know the file makes him the guarantor if that line fails. He would never agree if he knew. By Monday, the lender will have a clean story. Frank is old. He will be embarrassed, not angry," the man said. "And if Owen asks why you knew about the building?" Lydia gave a short laugh. "I did not spend 2 years making myself indispensable to a warehouse supervisor just to live in a one-bedroom apartment. I married a man with access to a future. His father was supposed to be part of it." There was a pause. Then she added, quieter, "I only need Harbor Street long enough to get $240,000 moving. After that, they can call it whatever they want." I stood by the back gate with my hand on the cold metal latch and felt something inside me settle. Not satisfaction, not relief, only the end of uncertainty. The investigator called me after Lydia left. She had preserved the recording and the arrival time. She had also seen Lydia take photographs of the folder and send them from the parking lot. The lender's fraud officer said the captured conversation matched concerns in the packet. They asked whether Owen would meet with them that afternoon. I asked the investigator one question before I called my son. Did she know she was being recorded? No, she said. But she knew she was in an authorized business office, discussing a business request, and she chose to speak freely. The record is lawful. The lender can decide what it proves. That mattered to me. I had not hired her to steal Lydia's private life. I had hired her to preserve what Lydia chose to do with my business, my name, and Owen's future. I called him. The truth is ready, I said. You should not have to hear it from me alone. He came to the office before the meeting. His face was gray with exhaustion. Did she confess? She said enough that a lender and the police need to hear it. I will play it once. After that, you can decide what questions you need to ask. He looked at Ruth's brass key on my desk. I keep thinking if you had told me about this building sooner, none of this would have happened. I have thought the same thing, I said. But my silence did not put a false signature on a credit request. Do not let my mistake make hers disappear. He nodded, though tears gathered in his eyes. By 3 o'clock, the office held 5 people: Owen, Lydia, the lender's fraud officer, the investigator, and me. Lydia arrived because I told her the lender wanted to clarify the application before closing it. She looked at Owen, then at the investigator, and finally at the phone on my desk. "What is this?" she asked. The fraud officer introduced herself and said the lender had found inconsistencies in the request. She did not accuse Lydia. She did not raise her voice. "Mr. Delaney has supplied evidence relevant to our review," she said. "We are here to hear it together." Lydia turned to Owen. "You called them?" "No," he said. "Dad did, because neither of us knew what you were doing." I pressed play. At first, the only sound was the office door closing. Then Lydia's voice filled the room, clear and familiar. Frank froze the Harbor Street transition and credit authorization. But Owen still thinks the packet was just about helping with inventory. Owen's hand went to the edge of the desk. The recording continued. "He does not know I copied Frank's signature onto the $240,000 credit authorization. He thinks he will manage the building. He does not know the file makes him the guarantor if that line fails." Owen's fingers slid off the desk. He made one small sound, as if the air had left him before he could stop it. The fraud officer stopped writing and looked directly at Lydia. The investigator did not move at all. When the recording reached the words about marrying a man with access to a future, Owen closed his eyes. When Lydia said she needed Harbor Street only long enough to get $240,000 moving, the fraud officer's pen stayed still above her notes. I stopped it there. I did not need to make him hear every cruel thing twice. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lydia said, "That is not what I meant. I was scared. I did not know how to fix it." The fraud officer picked up the folder Lydia had left the day before. "The application includes a signature attributed to Mr. Delaney and statements about Mr. Owen Delaney's future authority," she said. "The recording shows knowledge those statements were false. Our lender has frozen the request and referred the matter to the Financial Crimes Unit." Lydia looked at me as if I had done something unforgivable. "You recorded me. You used my name," I said. "You used my son. I made sure the truth had a voice." The investigator spoke only then. "The recording was made lawfully through Mr. Delaney's authorized business office," she said. "It has been preserved without alteration." Lydia turned to Owen. "Tell them I was trying to help us." Owen looked at the brass key, then at her. "You are trying to make us carry a debt we did not choose," he said. "That is not help." Lydia's eyes filled, but she did not look away from him. "You do not understand what it is like to be afraid all the time," she said. "My father lost work twice. My mother counted medicine money at the kitchen table. I promised myself I would never build a life-one bill away from panic." For a moment, I heard the frightened girl inside the woman who had just used us. Fear could explain a beginning. It could not make a forged name into love. "Wanting safety is not a crime," I said. "Making my son responsible for a debt he did not know about is." Lydia turned on me. "You had a whole building, and you hid it from him. You made him think he had nothing. I was wrong to keep it from him," I said. "That does not give you the right to take it." The fraud officer opened the application packet in front of us. She did not read every page aloud. She pointed to the line bearing my name, then to the statement that Owen would soon assume control of Harbor Street. "Mr. Delaney has denied this signature," she said. "Mr. Owen Delaney has denied authority to make this representation. The recording establishes knowledge that both statements were false. No funds were released, but attempted use of false information is not a clerical error." Lydia's face crumpled. "I was going to replace it with a real agreement," she said. After he signed something he did not understand, Owen asked. She did not answer. The fraud officer asked Owen whether Lydia had permission to use his identity documents or represent that he had agreed to manage the building. He said no. She asked me the same question about my signature and property. I said no. Each answer was simple. Each one closed another door Lydia had hoped to leave open. The fraud officer told us she had already sent the application, the lender's records, and the preserved recording to the Financial Crimes Unit. The detective had asked her to keep everyone available for a brief statement. She was not ordering Lydia to stay. She was telling her what had been reported. Lydia looked toward the door. For a second, I thought she might run. Then, she sat down in the chair Owen had left empty. "I need a lawyer," she said. "That is your right." The fraud officer replied. The detective arrived 20 minutes later with another officer. The fraud officer had already provided the lender's documents and the recording. The detective asked Lydia a few questions. Lydia asked for a lawyer. The detective told her she was being placed under arrest on probable cause for the forged application and attempted financial fraud. No one touched a gun. No one shouted. The officer read her rights in a voice so ordinary that it made the moment worse. Lydia looked at Owen once as they led her toward the door. "I loved you," she said. Owen did not answer. Love had become too small a word for what she had done with it. After they left, the office felt larger and emptier than it had ever felt. The fraud officer explained that the lender would keep the application frozen and cooperate with the investigation. She could not tell us what charges a prosecutor might ultimately bring. That was not her decision. I thanked her for saying what she knew and not pretending to know more. Owen sat in Ruth's chair for a long time. "I should have seen it," he said at last. "You should have been told the truth," I said. "By your wife, and by me years ago. Those are different failures. Do not make one excuse the other." For the next few weeks, Owen stayed with a friend. He spoke with an attorney about being separated from the application and with a counselor about the marriage. I did not sit in either room. My job was not to take over his life because I had finally learned how dangerous silence could be. One Monday evening, he came to my house carrying the framed wedding photograph the photographer had delivered before Lydia's arrest. In it, he and Lydia stood beneath a string of white lights, both of them smiling toward a future that had already begun to break apart. He set the frame face down on my kitchen table. "I keep wondering whether any of it was real," he said. I made coffee and set a cup in front of him. I did not tell him love had been false or true. Those answers belonged to the two people who had made the marriage. "A person can feel something and still use it badly," I said. "What matters now is that you do not let her choices teach you that your worth comes from a building." He looked toward the window, where the rain had begun to run down the glass. "I did not know you had it," he said. Then for one day I thought maybe it explained everything. Why she wanted me, why you kept things from me. "It explains some fear," I said. "It does not explain a forged signature. And it does not excuse me for keeping you outside the truth." He nodded slowly. The lender sent a letter that week, confirming no money had moved and no debt had attached to Harbor Street or to Owen. I put the letter in a drawer instead of framing it like a victory. The tenant unit stayed protected. The gate still groaned in damp weather. The building was not a prize we had won back. It was simply ours to keep caring for. Owen asked whether he could come by on Saturdays while the case moved forward. He did not ask for a key, a share, or a promise. "I want to see the work," he said. "Not the version she sold me. The real version." "Then come at 8, I told him. "The real version begins with a broom and a clogged drain." He laughed once. And the sound was small but honest. The detective called me 2 months later. Lydia had been formally charged after the lender completed its records review. The court issued an order that barred her from contacting me about Harbor Street or using my name in any financial matter while the case moved forward. I did not celebrate. A court order was not a repair. It was a line on paper protecting what a family should have protected by truth. Owen read the order at my kitchen till that night. He did not ask whether it meant he should forgive her or leave her. By then, he understood that a judge could restrict contact and a lender could freeze a request, but neither one could tell him what to do with a marriage built beside a lie. "I am going to let the case finish," he said, "and I am going to let myself see what is true before I decide what comes after." "That is enough for now," I told him. It was not a promise to repair the family. It was only a refusal to make another life decision, because someone had rushed him into it. Owen came to Harbor Street the following Saturday wearing work boots and an old flannel shirt. "I do not want the building," he said before I could ask why he was there. "Not as payment for what happened, but I want to understand what Mom and you built. I want to help if you will let me." I handed him a broom and pointed toward the back row. "You start by checking whether the drains are clear before the rain comes." He smiled a little. It was the first honest smile I had seen from him in months. He worked Saturdays after that. I paid him the same hourly wage I would have paid anyone else. He learned which doors stuck in cold weather, why the widow kept her unit near the front, and how much one broken gate motor could cost. He never asked when the building would be his. One winter afternoon, the detective called with the last thing she was allowed to tell me. Lydia had entered a guilty plea to charges tied to the false application. Restitution and the terms of her sentence were now matters for the court, not for our family. I thanked her and put the phone down. Owen was outside replacing a loose bolt on the gate. The wind lifted the blue ribbon around Ruth's brass key where it hung from the office hook. When he came in, I handed it to him. "Can I lock up?" he asked. "You can," I said. "Then bring it back tomorrow." He walked to the gate, turned the key, waited for the latch to catch, and looked back to make sure no one was inside. Then he brought the key back to me before we went home. That was enough.